You're listening to the free audiobook As Long As, a tale of righteous indignation composed one evening when I really couldn't be bothered. Narrated by ElevenLabs, written by Lefki Karantoni, copyright 2026, all rights reserved. Chapter 1. The Steaming Prophecy. The first time Harold P. Grimshaw tasted righteous indignation, it was 2:17 a.m. on a damp night, and the neighbour's cat had once again shat on his welcome mat, not beside it on the concrete, nor near it in the bordering agapanthus, plumb, geometrically centred upon it. It was as if the foul little beast had studied the bold serif lettering that spelt welcome, and decided with malice aforethought to translate the sentiment into feline. Harold stood shivering in his tartan bathrobe under the sickly glow of the streetlight. The turd was still warm, steaming gently in the crisp morning air like a tiny brown prophecy of the war to come. He stared at it. His hands began to shake, not from the chill of the suburban night, nor from the interruption of his REM sleep, but from clarity. For 54 years Harold had been a man of compromise. He had paid his taxes, trimmed his hedges to the council-mandated height of 4 feet, and silently endured the banality of his fellow man. But this was an escalation of cosmic proportions. "As long as I draw breath," he whispered to the indifferent, cratered moon, his voice carrying the solemn weight of a crusader taking a sacred vow. "No creature on God's green earth will disrespect my welcome mat again." He named the cat Lucifer. He named the neighbour Karen, even though he knew for a fact her name was Deborah, as he had retrieved her misdelivered mail for 6 years, and he began his descent into glorious madness. The first phase of the operation required logistics. Harold didn't resort to humane traps. Humane traps were for people who still believed in the inherent goodness of the universe. Harold's designs were engineered with coldness and cruelty. He had watched every single episode of Forged in Fire, paused the telly to take detailed schematic notes, and concluded that the contestants were not thinking big enough. He transformed his garden shed into a Black Ops laboratory. First came the procurement of the ghost pepper extract, ordered from a website operating out of a lockup in Bradford. It arrived in a vial marked with a skull and crossbones, which Harold found reassuringly honest. He spent 3 sleepless nights perfecting what he dubbed the Welcome Mat Apocalypse Device version 7.3. It involved spring-loaded spikes, blunted just enough to comply with international treaties on warfare, but sharp enough to deliver the pepper payload, and a network of motion-activated air horns. These were not standard air horns. They were wired in a parallel circuit to 3 9-volt batteries and rigged to scream the instrumental backing track of the national anthem at a staggering 140 decibels the moment a weight of more than 4 pounds graced the choir bristles. On the 4th night, the air was thick with anticipation. Harold sat in his darkened living room, sipping lukewarm Earl Grey, watching his front porch through the crack in the net curtains. At 2:14 a.m. a shadow slinked across the driveway. It was Lucifer, his tail held high in the universal flag of feline arrogance. The cat placed one paw on the mat. The resulting explosion of sound and pain lit up the quiet cul-de-sac. The air horns shrieked a deafening rendition of "God Save the King," drowning out the ungodly screech of the feline. Lucifer launched himself vertically, achieved an impressive altitude of perhaps 6 feet, and vanished into the night, having narrowly escaped the pepper spray. Lights flicked on in every house on the street. Deborah came running outside in her fluffy pink slippers and foam curlers, muttering about terrorism. Harold didn't hide. He strode out onto his porch and stood amidst the ringing echoes of the air horns, his arms spread wide like a crucified prophet. His tartan bathrobe flapped open in the breeze to reveal the sacred, immutable words he had sharpied across his pale, sunken chest in mirror writing, so he could reaffirm his vow every morning whilst brushing his teeth. "As long as—" Naturally, Deborah called the police. When the officers arrived, Two exhausted constables who'd rather be anywhere else in the Northern Hemisphere, Harold refused to step down from the porch, referring to them loudly as agents of moral decay sent to test my resolve. The officers took one long, weary look at the smear of ghost pepper on the welcome mat, the hysterical woman in curlers, and the wild-eyed, bare-chested man reciting obscure property laws. They exchanged a look that communicated a mutual decision. This was above their pay grade. They suggested Deborah keep her cat indoors and drove away. Harold smiled the serene smile of the newly anointed. That night, finally returning to his bed, he dreamed of oceans of cat poop rising like a biblical flood over the rooftops of Middle England. And there he stood, atop it all, dry as a bone, holding aloft a flaming sword forged from pure, unfiltered indignation. Chapter 2. The Expanding Perimeter. The morning after his ascension, Harold awoke with the vigour of a man who had finally discovered his life's purpose. He made his tea, toasted a single crumpet, and stood by his window. It was then he realised a fundamental truth of warfare. The welcome mat was merely the front line. It was a single chink in the armour. If a cat could violate the sanctity of his threshold so brazenly, what was stopping the rest of the encroaching suburban decay from infiltrating his fortress? He watched with hawk-like intensity as the morning postman approached. Gary was a disgustingly cheerful lad in his early 20s who had the infuriating habit of whistling chart-topping pop songs off-key. As Gary turned the corner into Harold's driveway, his left boot, a scuffed regulation-issue monstrosity, clipped the very edge of the freshly manicured lawn. He walked across the corner of the grass to save himself precisely 2 seconds of travel time to the letterbox. The audacity of it, the sheer unbridled disrespect for the boundary. Harold didn't rap on the glass, nor did he rush outside to wave his fist and shout. Shouting was a tool for amateurs who lacked discipline. Harold was now a professional architect of vengeance. He retreated to his shed, inhaling the intoxicating aroma of WD-40 and impending doom. By next morning, the front garden was fully rigged. The objective was simple: perimeter enforcement via psychological conditioning. Gary the postman arrived at 10:15 a.m., cheerily whistling something offensive by a boy band. As he approached number 42, his boots swung out, ready to shave off that crucial corner of the lawn. The moment his toe breached the airspace of the grass and broke the beam of a laser tripwire, repurposed from a cheap garage alarm system, the postal deterrent engaged. A battery of 3 modified leaf blowers, hidden expertly inside the dense foliage of the rhododendrons, roared to life. They didn't merely blow air. Harold had fitted the nozzles with bespoke PVC piping, creating a concentrated, high-speed vortex that blasted Gary with a preloaded mixture of dry autumn leaves, industrial-strength talcum powder, and 2 pounds of iridescent craft glitter. Gary shrieked, a sound that cracked an octave higher than his whistling. He dropped a fistful of final demands, takeaway menus and bank statements, and fled blindly down the pavement looking like a frosted, sparkly pastry. As long as the Royal Mail employs barbarians who can't respect a paved path, Harold muttered from the shadows of his hallway, sipping his Earl Grey, my grass shall remain an impregnable fortress. The escalation didn't go unnoticed. By the next evening, the neighbourhood watch had convened an emergency meeting on the pavement, outside Harold's property line. Nigel, the committee chairman, a man whose personality, wardrobe and marriage were built around his ownership of a petrol-powered, high PSR pressure washer, took the lead. He marched up to the edge of the driveway, clutching a clipboard to his chest, the universal shield of the middle management crusader. "Now, see here, Harold," Nigel called out, careful to keep the toes of his brogues strictly on the council-owned concrete. Deborah is traumatised. She's taking Lucifer to an animal psychic. Gary is on occupational therapy for glitter inhalation. We must insist as a community that you dismantle these medieval contraptions at once. Harold opened his front door and stepped out, the Sharpie on his chest barely visible under the collar of his tweed jacket. He fixed Nigel with a stare so devoid of blinking it could have turned a badger to stone. "Nigel," he said, his voice a resonant whisper, "you speak of dismantling, but look around you. The world is already dismantling itself. The fabric of society is unravelling thread by thread, starting with the failure to respect property lines. You're just upset because my order is louder than yours." Before Nigel could sputter a response or tick a box on his clipboard, Harold pressed a fob hidden in his jacket pocket. The garden sprinkler system engaged. However, it had been disconnected from the main water supply 3 days prior. Instead, it was hooked up to an oil drum, pumping out a fine mist of cheap fabric softener. Nigel took the brunt of it to the face. He retreated down the street, coughing, dropping his clipboard, and smelling like spring meadow. Chapter 3. The Protocol. The Great Siege of Number 42 commenced on a bleak, overcast Saturday afternoon. Deborah, having abandoned her real name to fully embrace the mantle of Karen the Avenger, had rallied the entire cul-de-sac. They formed a semicircle around the entrance to Harold's driveway. They were armed with garden hoses, mobile phones held aloft recording for Facebook Reels, and a laminated petition demanding Harold's immediate eviction, committal, or both. Even Reverend Phelps was present, though he looked confused about the militant turn of events, and was mainly just standing at the back, holding a plate of digestive biscuits in case a diplomatic tea break was called. Harold observed the gathering mob from his first-floor bedroom window. He felt no fear. He had anticipated this. History dictated that society always feared the visionary. They persecuted the men who dared to draw the line in the sand, or in this case, on the welcome mat. He calmly prepared for the final stand. He donned his finest ceremonial attire, a thick tweed jacket worn bare over his sharpied chest, Dunlop wellies, and a stainless steel pasta colander fastened to his head with 2 elastic bungee cords. The colander was essential. It would deflect their negative pedestrian brainwaves. He descended the staircase and threw open the front door. The crowd fell silent. The air crackled with the static electricity of 100 petty suburban grievances. "Mr. Grimshaw!" Karen bellowed, breaking the silence by pointing a trembling, acrylic-nailed finger at his chest. "We have 92 signatures. You're a menace to the community. You're unhinged." "I'm the community's immune system," Harold roared back, stepping onto his sanitized welcome mat. "You wallow in the filth of stray cats, trespassing postmen, and substandard boundary maintenance. I stand as the bulwark against the darkness." "You glued my wheelie bins to the curb," yelled Mr. Jones, a retired dentist from number 38, shaking a fist. "Because you left them out 3 days past collection, and they were out of alignment by 4 inches. Harold countered, his voice dripping with logic. "As long as geometry exists, I'll enforce it. A crooked bin is the first step to anarchy." The crowd surged forward an inch, a unified tidal wave of beige cardigans, waterproof jackets, and righteous fury. Harold didn't flinch. He reached into the deep pocket of his jacket and pulled out a battered red megaphone he had purchased at a car boot sale years ago for precisely this prophecy. "You leave me no choice," Harold announced, his voice booming as the megaphone's feedback whined. "You've breached the final perimeter of reason. I'm initiating the as long as protocol." He reached behind him and slammed his palm against a heavy-duty master switch he had wired into the doorframe. The cul-de-sac held its collective breath, bracing for the worst. They expected explosions. They expected ghost pepper tear gas. They expected high-speed glitter shrapnel. Nothing exploded. Instead, from a hidden array of waterproof speakers concealed in Harold's guttering, a sound began to play. It was a recording of Harold's own voice, looped infinitely, reciting the local municipal council's bylaws regarding hedge height, noise pollution, and the proper sorting of recyclable plastics. But it wasn't just a reading. The recording was pitched down, playing at exactly half speed, layered over a relentless synthetic backing track of out-of-tune Peruvian panpipes. Section 4, paragraph B, regarding the disposal of garden waste. The disembodied demonic voice droned over the screeching of the panpipes. The grinding banality of it hit the mob right in the gut. It was a psychological weapon of mass destruction. It bypassed their anger and assaulted their will to live. Reverend Phelps dropped his plate, the digestives shattering on the tarmac. Karen clutched her hands over her ears, her eyes wide with despair. Mr. Jones fell to his knees. The psychological warfare was absolute, unendurable, and, as Harold had researched, it was legally compliant within daylight hours. "As long as I draw breath," Harold chanted through the megaphone, his voice echoing triumphantly over the slow-motion bylaws and the screeching pipes. The neighbours began to break. They turned and scattered. "As long as I draw breath," he called after them. Harold stood alone in the ringing silence of the cul-de-sac. The last of them had fled, some weeping, some cursing, one poor soul crawling on all fours while muttering the recycling schedule like a broken rosary. The demonic panpipe bylaws droned on from the guttering speakers, slow and inexorable, a sonic enema for the soul. Harold switched off the megaphone. The colander on his head caught the weak afternoon light and threw it back like a cheap halo. He looked at his welcome mat, still pristine, still defiant, still bearing the sacred word in bold serif that no cat, postman, or mob had managed to desecrate. A warm, holy calm settled over him, but calm in Harold's new theology was the eye of the storm, and the storm was hungry. He spent the next 48 hours in a frenzy of sacred engineering. The shed became a cathedral of vengeance. He upgraded the Welcome Mat Apocalypse device to version 9.1, adding pressure-sensitive gel packets filled with a custom blend of expired blue cheese, fish sauce, and the collected tears of his own repressed childhood, or at least that's what he told himself the saline solution was. He reinforced the laser tripwires with secondary motion sensors scavenged from his late mother's animatronic Christmas reindeer. He even installed a small webcam so he could live-stream his triumphs to an audience of exactly 0 people on a dark web forum called Mat Defenders United. On the third night, the counterattack came. It began with a rumbling that Harold first mistook for distant thunder. Then he realised it was the sound of every wheelie bin in the street being rolled into position. The neighbours had formed an unholy alliance. Karen/Deborah led the charge, her face painted with war stripes made from leftover Bingo Dauber ink. Behind her marched Gary the postman, still faintly sparkling. Nigel, with his pressure washer now modified to fire rotten eggs, Mr. Jones waving a pair of oversized dental forceps, and even Reverend Phelps, who carried a cricket bat and a look of ecclesiastical despair. They advanced in a single line, pushing the bins ahead of them like medieval siege towers. Harold watched from the bedroom window, colander gleaming, chest sharpie freshly touched up. "As long as one welcome mat remains undefiled," he whispered, "I shall not yield." He activated the final protocol. The moment the first bin touched the edge of his driveway, the sky seemed to split open, or at least the speakers did. A new recording blasted forth, Harold's own voice, now layered with every disappointed sigh his ex-wife had ever uttered, slowed to a glacial crawl and mixed with the sound of nails on a chalkboard, played backwards. The lyrics, every single parking regulation from the 2019 Council Handbook, chanted in Latin. The effect was immediate and devastating. Karen dropped her bin and clawed at her own face. Gary's remaining glitter seemed to vibrate off him. Nigel's pressure washer backfired, covering him head to toe in egg yolk and self-loathing. Reverend Phelps began speaking in tongues, the tongues of several conflicting diocesan guidelines on hedge trimming. But one figure did not retreat. Lucifer, or perhaps Lucifer the Ninth, the line had become hard to track, emerged from the shadows. The cat had evolved. Its eyes glowed with the reflected light of 1,000 suburban grudges. The furry assassin moved, its tail flicking like a metronome. It stepped onto the welcome mat. The Apocalypse device version 9.1 engaged. Spikes, peppers, cheese mist, fish sauce, air horns screaming "Rule Britannia" at a pitch that could shatter glass and eardrums alike. The cat didn't care in the least. It just left, after leaving a perfect steaming secondary prophecy in the centre of the mat. A final, glorious fuck you from the animal kingdom. Harold didn't rage this time. He laughed. He laughed so hard his colander rattled, tears streaming down his face and mixing with the scent of fabric softener still clinging to the air. Then he did the only thing a truly righteous man could do. He stepped forward, knelt on the now defiled mat, and with the solemnity of a knight dubbing himself, rubbed his own face into the warm, fragrant offering. The neighbours, watching from a safe distance, gasped in collective horror. Harold rose slowly, brown streaks painting his cheeks like the war paint of a Highland berserker. His eyes were wild, serene, and unmoored from the mortal plane. "As long as this mat exists," he proclaimed to the knight, his voice carrying over the dying wail of the panpipes, "I'll defend it. As long as cats shit and postmen trespass and councils write bylaws, I'll be the line they can't cross. As long as one man still knows the difference between order and chaos, between welcome and violation, between compromise and truth." He spread his arms wide, bathrobe long since abandoned, colander askew, chest sharply smeared but still legible. "Then this was all worth it?" The cul-de-sac fell silent. Then, one by one, the neighbours began to clap, not in mockery or in relief, but in recognition. Something primal had been awakened in them, a shared, deranged understanding that the world was full of welcome mats waiting to be shat upon, and that someone had to stand guard. Harold bowed once, then turned and walked back into his house, leaving the mat exactly as it was, stained, victorious, eternal. Behind him the speakers clicked off. In the quiet a single new sound rose, soft and deliberate. Another cat, somewhere in the distance, began to dig. Harold smiled in the darkness of his hallway. The prophecy was not over. It had only just begun to steam. The end. Thank you for listening to As Long As, a tale of righteous indignation composed one evening when I really couldn't be bothered, written by Lefki Karantoni. If you'd like to explore more of her work, visit www.lefkikarantoni.com.